The Ruy Lopez opening is generally considered to be one of the most boring and strategically heavy openings in chess. However, today, with three of my sharpest Ruy Lopez games, I'm going to try to challenge that popular belief and try to change your opinion in the process. So, on to the first game we go. I'm playing with the white pieces and I open the game with e4. My opponent replies e5, and we get into this Ruy Lopez opening. And after a few more development moves, my opponent goes for castles. It is not the main line here because it declares black's intentions to go for the martial attack. If white here were to go c3, black would have an opportunity to strike in the center with d5, and after takes, black would give up this pawn on e5 and get this long-lasting initiative. Now black threatens checkmate on h2. The black bishop supports fire, and white's pieces are massively underdeveloped, which is why I didn't want to go for this line. When I went h3, stopping the queen h4 and bishop d6 attack in its tracks because now the queen obviously doesn't see the h2 square anymore. He went d6, I played c3, and then I struck in the center, bishop b7, a4, took on d4, just a slight inaccuracy. But obviously we're no engines and we don't have to make every perfect move here. Knight e5, bishop drops back, and he started expanding on the queen side as well. And I had to stop his initiative. He pushed c5, had to block his bishop. Now it's much worse. c4, b3, and c3. Now, those two pawns look kind of dangerous. And in fact, if I were to carelessly go knight c4, which is a big mistake, black would take this knight and push a5, creating a pawn chain and having two passers that are very near the edge of the board. So they are extremely dangerous, and now black has an advantage. Which is why I had to retreat my knight to f1 and perhaps reroute it somehow on the king side, which has happened in the game, after knight d7, which is given a slight inaccuracy by the computer. It's not an awful move. The plan is simple. Put the knight on c5, start putting pressure on b3, maybe on e5. Those are two very nice outpost squares for black. However, I have had this very nice move knight g3, intending to go to f5 and put pressure on black's bishops and kingside, which is why he defended it, obviously. But this g6 move created two critical weaknesses on f6 and h6, which I was quick to take advantage of with the best move in this position. Pause if you want to find it. The move is knight h2. The knight intends to go to g4 and kind of put pressure on black's position, which is why my opponent, understandably, pushes his h-pawn, which is actually a big mistake. And as you saw from the thumbnail, I sacrificed my knight here. It is the best move. And in fact, black should have just ignored it. They should have underdeveloped his bishop. This is the line given by the computer, and of course, no human would ever do this, which is why my opponent just took. And to be fair, I would as well. This is the most natural move in the position. However, it is also losing because now after queen h5, I'm threatening to get my knight into the game, maybe push e5, get my bishops in. My opponent puts his knight on e5, blocking the pawn and bishop, but I still can develop my knight to g4. My point being is that after he takes, he's now losing by force. If he goes to f8, this is just checkmate on the spot. And if he goes to h8, say, He will lose soon after. There are many ways, but I think the most accurate one is just to open the bishop, and obviously the end is here. However, my opponent is no fool. He didn't took on g4. He tried to bring in the bishop into the defenses, but I kind of just ignored it. Knight h6 and pushed my pawn. I needed to, well, it is a slight inaccuracy, but um, getting my pieces into the game. Knight g6, and now I sacrifice my knight again. The point being is that if he takes, I just have f5, e5 actually, better yet, e5 opening up the bishop, and this pressure is just lethal completely. Which is why my opponent played bishop d4. He tried to create some counterplay. I find the best move in this position, bishop e3. The point being is that now after he recaptures, I bring in my rook, and the pressure is massive. Queen b6, rook e1, I bring in the second rook. He didn't want to take here again for the same reason of e5 and just lethal attack completely. He tried to bring in his rook, but the writing is on the wall with his pawn. I went knight g5. Now his knight is completely hanging. Of course, if I were to just take here, he would take. The position is still winning, but kind of messy. Knight g5, and my opponent just blundered the fork. And here he resigned because after king g7, I bring in the rook. Oh, it's spent. Well, after a quick detour, you could go king h1, you can go king h2, or even f5. Anything works here, really. So this is the first out of 3 games. Stay tuned. In the game number 2, I'm playing with the black pieces. However, it is still the old same Ruy Lopez opening and the same old forfeit defense. But on move 5, my opponent makes a quite rare move, to be honest, d3, which is met by b5 and bishop c5. Now, I don't have to leave my bishop on e7, and I can develop it all the way to c5. My opponent replies with c3. Now, there are some Italian opening motives, the break in the center, 92 and out of 1, this kind of boring stuff. But it is what it is. So far, it's kind of equal, wouldn't you agree? However, the fireworks would soon erupt after this move h6. My opponent pushes the pawn at the center. I dropped back my bishop all the way to a7, and after quick recapture, my opponent here thought that he was winning a pawn after bishop f7. However, I found this beautiful move, knight e4. Now, some of you might say that, oh no, I blundered a 4, because bishop d5 attacks the knight and the rook at the same time. At least one of them will have to be given up. However, there is a fantastic, brilliant motive of knight f2. The point of this move is that after he takes, I have a rook f8 with a deadly threat of if he just does nothing, I go knight h3 and rook 1. The checkmate is on the board and black has won the game, which is why my opponent finds the only move in this position, um, bishop f3. It blocks the line of sight of my rook, and black is no longer in an immediate danger. However, he's not out of the woods yet. In this position, I play e4, which is a mistake. However, the winning sequence, well, not winning, but for an advantage for black here is knight h3, king h1, e4, and after he takes, you take the bishop, and the attack is deadly. Actually, he shouldn't take on h3, he should just develop and give up his piece altogether. Of course, not recapture because it would lead to the same thing after yeah, bishop b7. The king is just smothered there in the corner of the board. But in the game, he played e4 immediately, which is a mistake because now he can take on f2. Um, I took an f3, and after bishop d2, fx g2, bishop e1, he's surprisingly out of the woods. Or so he thought. After bishop b7, knight e2, with the threat after rook e8, he would just block the pin on the rook, and I would no longer be able to attack it. So now I'm forced to take it here. My opponent made a critical blunder. He took with a king, and as indicated by those double exclamation marks, it is a big blunder because after the rook f8, his king is forced away. Of course, if he goes to e3, g3, or any square, any dark square, I would just queen and win the game very easily. However, my opponent played the best move, king d2. It was a blitz 3+0 game, so I didn't really have much time to say. But the only move that gives black an advantage is to promote the pawn to the knight. The point here is that his king is in check. And so you just have time to get out with a knight, trade it off, or do whatever. In the game, I promoted to a queen, but after bishop h4, I had to give it up back for a piece and have this equal position. As mentioned, however, this is a 3+0 game, and my opponent was very low on time. I tried to trade out the rooks, but I walked into this embarrassing fort. The position was equal, however, I was able to flag him here and win the game on timeout. And the last game of the day, I'm playing with the white pieces against a 2600 rated opponent from China. It is a 3+0 in this game. It is an important piece of information because it just goes to show that even such a high-rated opponent can walk into beautiful tactics that lie in this opening. So the game began just as the other two did, with a Morphy defense, right? The castles line, the martial attack, right? H3, D6, C3. And here my opponent undeveloped their knight, which is absolutely unacceptable. You might wonder, why would they ever do it, right? Well, the reason is actually quite simple. They want to meet d4 with knight d7 and defend the pawn from d7. Now, the point is very sophisticated. Black want to get white to overextend with this d5 move and then just undermine his structure. It's very difficult strategic stuff, and there's just no point in explaining it in this video. So I just want. All I want to say is that for 95% of you, on developing your piece is generally a very bad idea in the opening. Instead of that, you could just develop a bishop or a rook or just any other developing move. But in this position, my opponent knows what they're doing and they're just undeveloping their knight. And after d4, here it is, knight d7, knight d2. I just develop my knight. I want to put it on g3. Pretty normal stuff so far. However, in this position, my opponent makes a critical mistake. Rook e8. Try to pause this video, actually. The tactic is very beautiful. I would give you a hint. The queen is in the box and it has no moves. So pause the video if you want to solve it yourself and comment your best guesses. The best move for white in this position, and the only winning one, in fact, is bishop takes f7. The point is that if you just retreat with a king, I just win an exchange and a pawn in the game. It's very simple. However, if you recapture, I check. Now, please pay attention that the king is forced away from this e6 square. It cannot eat its own knight now, can it? Or it cannot eat its own bishop. So it has to go away, and after 96, which happened in the game, the queen is just simply trapped. There's absolutely nothing you can do. The game is basically over by this point, though it took me an embarrassing while to actually convert the advantage. But we will not talk about that for now. We will talk about this brilliant Bishop of 7 sacrifice. Um, if you're curious how grandmasters playing this position. The best move here is bishop b7, put in pressure. Now I don't have this knight f1 move because we just can't get pawn. So you have to drop back your bishop, and now rook e just works nicely. The queen has an escape route, and the bishop is not eyeing the f7 square anymore. So it's just working out very nicely. And that concludes our video for today. Thank you very much for watching it. Please do consider leaving a like and subscribing if you want to see more educational and fun content like this. Also, keep in mind that I do sometimes stream on Twitch. The link is in the description if you're interested. With that being said, see you in the next one. Goodbye.